Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping speaking by phone amid heightened tensions. What came out of the meeting? China's critical mineral curbs are hitting the auto industry, with production lines shutting down. U.S. auto suppliers are urging swift action. President Trump moving to block foreign students from attending Harvard University. But why? The White House points to Harvard's controversial ties to China's communist regime. Is America's manufacturing strength slipping away? Marco Rubio says offshoring left the U.S. exposed to China. More on what Vice President JD Vance calls a national emergency. And 2 Chinese nationals charged with smuggling a dangerous fungus into the U.S. What exactly is this biological threat? Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link down below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week, we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world, and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. President Trump and Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping spoke by phone Thursday as tensions remain high over the ongoing U.S.-China trade dispute. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the highlights.
It's definitely a long-awaited call, as if you remember, tensions have been escalating between the two countries for months since the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs on China and later escalating tariffs from both sides. And today, President Trump says he held an hour and 30-minute call with China's Xi Jinping, and saying that the two quote, straighten out complexity of the trade deal, especially when it comes to rare earth minerals. And this phone call, meanwhile, comes days after President Trump accused China of totally violating a trade deal that the two sides achieved in Geneva a while ago, after which the two sides paused their tariffs. And today, Trump says that the trade talks should be back on track. Watch.
We have a deal with China, as you know, but we were straightening out some of the points having to do mostly with rare earth magnets and some other things. We're going to just make sure that everybody understands what the deal is.
Trump administration officials, meanwhile, though, have warned that this Chinese Communist Party has a history of breaking its promises when it comes to already established trade agreements, as well as, for example, when it comes to the fentanyl issue. And China has not kept its word in trying to stop that flow of fentanyl precursor coming into the U.S. for years. Meanwhile, Trump says that the two teams, when it comes to trade, will soon meet again with location to be announced, and that both him and Xi have accepted invitations from each other to visit each other's countries.
China's export curbs on critical minerals are forcing manufacturers from Europe to Asia to halt production lines. U.S. auto suppliers are now calling on Washington for immediate action. China's tit-for-tat move against the U.S. is hitting the global auto industry. Several European car parts makers have halted production lines, joined by Japan's Suzuki and multiple factories in India. The issue centers on rare earth elements and critical magnets, which China continues to control tightly, even during the 90-day tariff truce. The U.S. says China is violating the Geneva Agreement meant to ease trade tensions. The European Union is also urging Beijing to lift its export restrictions. But China's foreign ministry is brushing off those complaints. The International Energy Agency reports China accounts for 61% of the world's rare earth production and 92% of global processing capacity. That leaves much of the world deeply dependent and vulnerable. The U.S. is halting a major petrochemical shipment to China. The Commerce Department is moving to block over 2 million barrels of ethane, a key ingredient in plastics and fuel, from heading there. Enterprise Products Partners, one of the biggest U.S. fuel shippers, says it received notice this week of the department's intent to deny its shipment requests. And another exporter, Energy Transfer, says it was told it now needs a license to ship ethane to China. The restrictions come as trade tensions between the U.S. and China continue to escalate, even after talks in May eased some reciprocal tariffs. Both nations recently imposed export restrictions on critical resources. China has limited shipments of rare earth materials essential for electronics and defense. Meanwhile, the U.S. has banned exports of advanced semiconductor technologies to China. Despite a temporary truce in May, these new restrictions highlight a deepening divide in trade relations. Beijing is maintaining tariffs on U.S. propane, a fuel similar to ethane. While China can source propane from places like the Middle East, it has few alternatives when it comes to ethane. That's why China made an exception for tariffs on ethane, since the U.S. is the only country that exports it overseas. Ethane is a key ingredient used to make plastics and has become one of America's top exports in recent years. According to Enterprise Products Partners, Washington believes these shipments could help strengthen Beijing's military capabilities. On the other hand, analysts warn the U.S. restrictions on ethane exports to China could deal a big blow to U.S. energy exporters' revenues. The move might also disrupt one of the biggest U.S. energy export markets, as there are no clear alternatives for the volume China usually buys. President Trump has signed a new proclamation suspending new international student visas for Harvard University. It's the latest escalation in a legal standoff between the administration and the Ivy League school over federal funding. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the latest.
I don't think Harvard's been acting very nicely.
President Trump's proclamation, titled Enhancing National Security by Addressing Risks at Harvard University, halts entry for new international students under student, work, and exchange visitor visas. It also authorizes the Secretary of State to consider revoking visas of current Harvard students who fall under its criteria. The proclamation accuses Harvard of failing to discipline some categories of conduct violations on campus. It also states that U.S. adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party are trying to take advantage of American higher education by exploiting the student visa program for improper purposes and by using visiting students to collect information at elite universities in the United States.
The United States, I further can say here, will not tolerate the CCP's exploitation of U.S. universities.
The White House says the Chinese Communist Party has sent thousands of mid-career and senior bureaucrats to study at U.S. institutions. Harvard responded to the international visa suspension, calling the proclamation retaliatory. It vowed to continue to protect its international students. The relationship between Harvard and Beijing has elicited concerns about Chinese Communist Party influence. Harvard has long been known among Chinese people for its role in educating the communist regime's elites. In 2014, one state-run media outlet nicknamed the Ivy League University's Kennedy School of Government an unofficial party school. The White House says Harvard has also developed an extensive relationship with foreign adversaries, receiving more than $150 million from China alone. In exchange, it says Harvard has hosted Chinese Communist Party paramilitary members and partnered with China-based individuals on research that could advance China's military modernization. Xi Jinping's own daughter attended Harvard as an undergraduate in the early 2010s. At Harvard University's recent graduation, Zhang Yurong, the first Chinese woman selected to speak at the ceremony, delivered a hopeful message about ending poverty and embracing global unity. But her speech sparked backlash, with critics noting striking similarities to a core Chinese Communist Party slogan, "A community with a shared future for mankind," a phrase closely tied to Communist leader Xi Jinping's diplomatic agenda. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Two top U.S. officials are sounding the alarm, warning that America's economic foundation is at risk. Vice President JD Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are calling for a return to industrial strength. They say decades of offshoring U.S. manufacturing have weakened national security and left the country exposed to threats from adversaries like China. Here's more on that story.
Vice President JD Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio Tuesday sounded the alarm on America's shrinking industrial base. They gave the keynote address at a gala in Washington, D.C. for American Compass, a conservative economic think tank. Rubio warned that decades of moving manufacturing offshore have undercut U.S. national security and left the country vulnerable to adversaries like China.
We didn't just undermine our society. We didn't just undermine our domestic economy. We've undermined our position in the world.
He argued that U.S. foreign policy for too long prioritized global interests over the national good.
The number one foreign policy priority of the United States needs to be the United States and what's in the best interest of the United States.
Rubio said trade policies must now shift to reflect national interests, calling for an end to trade imbalances that hurt American workers. Vice President Vance echoed that urgency, warning that America's ability to innovate is tied directly to its capacity to build.
This idea that we can separate the making of things from the innovating of things is, I think, totally farcical.
Vance said the U.S. has let its skilled labor force erode and now faces a national emergency to rebuild core competencies.
The president's very focused on that, but it drives home, how much of a national emergency we're in, that we've lost critical skills, and we weren't even aware that we had lost those skills until a few months ago.
Both Rubio's and Vance's remarks underscore the Trump administration's new economic strategy, one that favors tariffs and bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. The administration's latest tariffs remain under legal review and negotiations with China are ongoing. Meanwhile, Vance and Rubio say America's economic future must be built at home.
Coming up, 2 Chinese nationals charged with smuggling a dangerous fungus into the U.S. What exactly is this biological threat? Arizona's governor blocking a bill that would ban China from buying land in the state. What's behind the veto? And South Korea swears in a new president. We have the White House's reaction. That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 2 Chinese nationals are now facing federal charges, accused of smuggling a dangerous crop-killing fungus into the U.S. Scientists warn the biological agent could devastate America's food supply. Here's more.
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Michigan says the fungus is responsible for billions in agricultural losses each year. It's toxic to both people and livestock.
According to court documents, University of Michigan researcher Yongqing Jian first smuggled the fungus in 2022, stuffing it into her boots to avoid detection. It also accuses her of asking a third party to send her the pathogen in January of last year, who then allegedly shipped the samples inside a statistics textbook. The package was intercepted before it arrived.
Her boyfriend, Zhongyang Liu, was caught in July with baggies of contaminated plant material hidden in his backpack at the Detroit airport. Authorities say both suspects admitted they planned to use the lab at the University of Michigan to conduct unauthorized research.
The University of Michigan released a statement denying accusations of receiving funding from the Chinese government and saying they strongly condemn any actions that seek to cause harm or threaten national security.
In a statement, FBI Director Kash Patel says the case is a, quote, sobering reminder that the Chinese Communist Party continues to deploy operatives and researchers to infiltrate our institutions and target our food supply, an act that could cripple our economy and endanger American lives. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs vetoes a bill that would ban the Chinese Communist regime and state-owned companies from buying property in Arizona. Let's take a closer look.
The bill was introduced by Arizona Senate Majority Leader Janae Shamp and vetoed by Hobbs on Monday. It aims to stop China from buying or owning more than 30% of any property in Arizona. The bill was created to protect the state's military, commercial, and agricultural assets. It's meant to prevent foreign spying or sabotage that could threaten national security. But Hobbs said the bill was not effective at counter-espionage and did not directly protect military assets in the state from such potential threats. The governor also said that the bill is unclear on how it would be put into action and that it could lead to arbitrary enforcement. She did not explain further. Shamp criticized the governor's veto and said it was a politically motivated move. She said that Arizona's future could be at risk if Hobbs keeps making similar decisions.
South Korea has a new president. Lee Jae-myung is sworn in Wednesday, promising pragmatic diplomacy focused on national interest. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports with White House reaction.
Lee secured a decisive victory in Tuesday's snap election, following the dramatic fall of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, ousted 3 years into his term after a failed attempt to impose martial law. In his inauguration speech, President Lee called for the restoration of South Korea's democracy, which he said had been destroyed by armored vehicles and rifles.
Our livelihoods and economy, which have collapsed due to indifference and irresponsibility, and our national security and peace, which have been reduced to tools of political strife.
Lee also pledged to turn global crises, economic, environmental, and security-related, into opportunities to advance South Korea's national interest. On Wednesday, President Lee outlined key foreign policy priorities. He vowed to restart talks with North Korea, with peace and deterrence at the heart of his strategy. He also committed to strengthening trilateral ties with the United States and Japan during his 5-year term. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba congratulated Lee and expressed hope for stronger cooperation with both South Korea and the U.S., their mutual ally.
Japan and South Korea face similar challenges, such as rapid population aging and declining birth rates.
Ishiba added that he hoped to hold summit talks with Lee as early as possible when the new South Korean government is launched. The White House called South Korea's election fair, but raised concerns about potential interference from China. In a statement to Reuters, a White House official mentioned Chinese interference and influence in democracies around the world without connecting that directly to South Korea. Lee has previously emphasized the need to balance Seoul's relationships with both Washington and Beijing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio congratulated Lee and reaffirmed the U.S.-South Korea ironclad alliance. Rubio also said Washington will continue to deepen trilateral cooperation with Seoul and Tokyo to bolster regional security, enhance economic resilience, and defend shared democratic principles. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
The new South Korean president steps in amid rising U.S.-China tensions. How might his leadership affect regional stability and the country's religious communities? We sat down with Jeff King, president of International Christian Concern, for insights. Jeff King, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Now, following Lee's win in the South Korean elections, given that he was backed by the Chinese Communist Party, how do you see his victory impacting U.S.-China relations?
Yeah, it's gonna put a further strain on U.S.-China relations. You know, on the one hand, this is China's backyard. On the other hand, we have a very tight relationship with South Korea. And when you see a candidate that's effectively going to be controlled by the CCP, by the Communist Party, that's going to put a lot of frustration and strain into an already very strained relationship. So that would be the short answer.
Now, zeroing in on South Korea, you know, given Lee's new leadership, what can we expect in terms of the faith communities there?
So he's going to, first of all, tilt policies toward Beijing. He's going to prefer dialogue with North Korea, which means we're going to let North Korea do whatever they want. And he'll probably shut down or try to shut down missionary efforts and the gospel going into North Korea. You know, he's not the first CCP-funded, controlled candidate in Korea to reach the presidency. And so we have a track record. So we'll see that. And there'll be, it gets a little more nuanced because Korea has an extremely strong faith community. And interestingly, 80% of the population hate Xi. They know who Xi is. They know who the CCP is. But they don't seem to understand the influence that China has and how they're gaining influence in the political games they play.
Jeff King, thank you so much for your time.
Honor to be with you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.